I'll never forget the day the letter arrived. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where the air already smelled like summer and you could hear the squeak of sneakers on pavement as kids dribbled basketballs down driveways. My son, Jacob, was out front with 3 of his friends, taking turns shooting at the hoop we'd set up years ago. That old hoop wasn't just a piece of metal and backboard, it was practically a member of the family. It had seen Jacob's first basket, countless neighborhood games, and even the occasional late-night shoot-around when I couldn't sleep. I poured myself a coffee, sat on the porch, and let the sound of bouncing basketballs set the rhythm of the morning. That's when I noticed Patricia, our HOA president, walking down the street with her usual air of self-importance. She wore her wide-brimmed sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and carried a clipboard like it was a crown jewel. Should have known she was up to something. She gave our driveway hoop one of her trademark scowls before sliding an envelope into my mailbox and strutting off without a word. I opened the letter right there. It was stamped with the HOA's seal, formal as ever, effective immediately. All basketball hoops permanent, temporary, or otherwise are prohibited from being visible within the neighborhood. Homeowners must remove such items within 30 days. Non-compliance will result in fines of $150 per violation per day. I remember rereading it twice, my jaw tightening with every word. I looked up at Jacob, who was laughing with his friends after sinking a three-pointer. Try telling them their hoop was unsightly. My stomach twisted with frustration. Who in their right mind would think a basketball hoop was more offensive than Patricia's cluttered yard full of faded garden gnomes, wind chimes that sounded like clashing silverware, and that ridiculous pink flamingo collection she updated every holiday? I called Jacob over and handed him the letter. His face dropped. Wait, they're banning hoops. But why? He asked, his voice cracking between disbelief and anger. Everyone plays out here. This isn't just our zits, we're the whole block hangs out. He was right. Our hoop wasn't just for him. Nearly every kid in the neighborhood had taken a shot on it at some point. I'd watched friendships form in our driveway, kids of all ages and backgrounds coming together over a game. It wasn't just a hoop, it was a community anchor. But Patricia didn't see it that way. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and tried to reason with them. I explained how basketball kept the kids active, gave them a safe place to gather, and built bonds that carried into the community. I even offered a compromise. What if we installed a community hoop in the park, away from the houses? That way, it wouldn't be unsightly or a nuisance. Patricia barely let me finish before slamming her hand on the table. The decision is final, she snapped. Basketball hoops are a liability. Balls rolling into the street. Kids yelling at all hours, disruptive and dangerous. This is a residential community, not a playground. The room went quiet. I scanned the faces of my neighbors. Some looked sympathetic, others looked nervous. But nobody spoke up against her. Patricia had that effect on people. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, and everyone seemed too afraid to challenge her. I sat down, fuming, while Patricia moved on to the next agenda item like she had just solved world hunger. But I wasn't about to let her have the last word. The weeks that followed were tense. Slowly, hoops started disappearing from driveways. Kids dragged their basketballs around like orphans without a home. Jacob grew restless, frustrated. Dad, this isn't fair. Why does she get to decide everything? He asked one night at dinner. That question stuck with me. Why did Patricia get to decide everything? Why did we all let her? One afternoon, I caught Jacob and his friends sneaking the hoop back out of the garage. They were desperate for just one more game. When Patricia drove by, she slowed her car, rolled down her window, and shouted, "That better be gone by tonight, or the fines start tomorrow." She had that smug smile plastered across her face, like she was savoring every ounce of power she had. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I spent the next week diving into the HOA bylaws, zoning codes, and city ordinances. If Patricia wanted to wave around paperwork, then I'd beat her at her own game. I discovered something fascinating. The HOA had jurisdiction over front-facing and street-visible structures. But backyards, especially fenced-in ones, were largely exempt, provided any construction complied with city zoning and building codes. That little loophole lit a fire in me. If Patricia didn't want hoops in driveways, fine. I'd give her something bigger, better, and completely out of her control. I wasn't just going to keep a hoop, I was going to build a full basketball court in my backyard. The idea was crazy at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had a big backyard that was barely being used. The kids needed a place to play, the community needed a win, and Patricia needed to be reminded that she wasn't the ultimate authority. And if I could get the city's blessing, the HOA wouldn't be able to lift a finger. So while Patricia strutted around the neighborhood, certain she had crushed the joy out of every kid on the block, I was quietly sketching plans, meeting with contractors, and scheduling a visit with city officials. What she didn't know was that her victory had only just set the stage for her greatest defeat. Because soon, instead of one hoop in my driveway, she'd be staring at an entire full-sized court in my backyard. Then there wouldn't be a single thing she could do to stop it. After I made up my mind, I knew I had to play this smart. Patricia thrived on intimidation, but the one thing she couldn't beat was the law. If I was going to build a full basketball court in my backyard, I needed every detail covered, every paper filed, and every I dotted before she even caught wind of what I was planning. The first step was research. I spent hours poring over city zoning ordinances, buried in PDFs that looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. I learned more about easements, setbacks, and noise ordinances in 1 week than most people probably learn in a lifetime. My wife thought I'd gone crazy when she found me at 2 a.m. with a highlighter, muttering about residential accessory structures. But when I finally found the passage that confirmed backyard recreational courts were perfectly legal as long as they didn't exceed certain dimensions, I felt like I'd struck gold. The next day, I took my sketches, rough drawings I'd made on graph paper, down to the city planning office. The clerk, a friendly guy named Robert, raised an eyebrow when I explained what I wanted to build: a full-sized basketball court. "In your backyard?" he asked, clearly intrigued. "Not NBA regulation," I clarified with a laugh, "but close enough for the kids to feel like they're playing on the real thing. Half-court dimensions, regulation hoop height, painted lines. I want it done right." Robert flipped through the zoning code with me, double-checking the setback requirements. "Looks like you're in the clear as long as you stay 10 feet off the property line. And of course, you'll need to file a building permit if you're pouring concrete." But he leaned in with a smile. "There's nothing the HOA can do if you meet city requirements. Their authority stops where ours begins." Those words were music to my ears. I submitted the paperwork right then and there. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly, careful not to let Patricia catch wind of my plans. I scheduled contractors to come by during the day when she was usually out at her yoga classes or HOA business lunches. They measured, staked out the yard, and by the end of the month, I had a concrete slab poured that stretched nearly the width of my backyard. My neighbors peeked over the fence, curious. One of them, Greg, leaned over one afternoon and asked, "What are you building back there? Looks like a foundation for a garage." I grinned. "Not a garage, a basketball court." His eyes widened. "No way. Patricia's going to lose her mind." "That's the point," I replied, chuckling. Word started to spread. Kids riding their bikes slowed down by my house, whispering about the giant slab. Parents smiled knowingly when they saw me outside with a tape measure, marking lines. It felt like a secret rebellion, and the neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. Of course, Patricia wasn't completely oblivious. One afternoon, as the contractors were smoothing out the last section of concrete, her car screeched to a halt in front of my house. She stormed out, her sunglasses perched on top of her head, and stomped straight into my backyard without so much as knocking. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the freshly poured concrete like it was a toxic spill. I wiped my hands on my jeans and gave her my calmest smile. "It's my backyard, Patricia, and soon it's going to be a basketball court." "You can't do that," she snapped. "The HOA has banned basketball hoops. That includes whatever nonsense you're trying to pull here." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my back pocket, the approved building permit, stamped and signed by the city. I handed it to her like it was a trump card. "Actually, I can. The HOA's authority doesn't extend to backyard recreational structures as long as they meet city code. And as you can see, this one does." Her face went red. She glanced at the permit, sputtered something about aesthetics, then shoved it back into my chest. "We'll see about this," she hissed before storming off down the street. The contractors exchanged amused looks. One of them muttered, "She's going to be fun at parties." I laughed. "You have no idea." By the time the concrete cured and the hoop was installed, my backyard had been transformed. Freshly painted lines marked the free throw circle, the three-point arc, and the baseline. A regulation hoop stood tall at the end, complete with a breakaway rim. It looked like something out of a high school gym, only it was right in my backyard. The first time Jacob and his friends saw it, their jaws dropped. "Dad, this is amazing," Jacob shouted, running onto the court with his ball. His friends followed, bouncing balls and calling dibs on teams. I stood back, arms crossed, watching as the first game unfolded. The sound of sneakers squeaking and basketballs bouncing filled the air, echoing across the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, the kids were smiling again, and me. I was smiling too, not just because of the court, but because I knew Patricia was sitting in her house, seething. Little did I know, though, that this was just the beginning, because Patricia wasn't about to let me have the last word, and the battle between us was about to get a whole lot bigger. It didn't take long for Patricia to make her move. Just a week after the first game on my brand new court, an envelope appeared in my mailbox with the dreaded HOA letterhead on top. I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. It was a violation notice, charging me a $250 fine for unauthorized recreational equipment visible from the street. The letter was dripping with Patricia's usual tone, condescending, smug, and full of empty threats. At the bottom, in her tidy, cursive-like signature, she wrote, "Failure to remove this violation will result in escalating fines and potential legal action." I set the letter on the kitchen counter and called my wife over. Well, it didn't take her long. My wife read the notice, shook her head, and smirked. She must have been pacing by the window, just waiting to write this up. "What are you going to do?" I grinned and tapped the letter. "Frame it, because it's worthless." The truth was, I had already spoken to a lawyer when I got the city approval. I knew Patricia would come after me with everything she had, and I wanted to be ready. The lawyer confirmed what I suspected, as long as I had city approval and met the setback requirements. The HOA couldn't enforce their ban inside my backyard. Their rule only applied to front yards and driveways, where basketball hoops were visible from the street. So, instead of tearing down the hoop, I walked over to Patricia's house with a copy of my lawyer's letter and the city permit. She answered the door with that trademark scowl. "I got your notice," I said cheerfully, handing her the documents. "Here's my official response. You might want to file this in your records." She snatched the papers, skimmed them, and her eyes narrowed. "This doesn't change anything. The board will meet about this." Great, I said. I'll bring popcorn. Sure enough, at the next HOA meeting, Patricia tried to rally the board against me. I didn't even want to go, but several neighbors urged me to attend. When I walked into the community center, I could feel the tension. Patricia sat at the head of the table, papers stacked in front of her like ammunition. This homeowner has flagrantly violated our community rules, she began, pointing at me like I was a criminal on trial. A full basketball court in a backyard is disruptive, unsightly, and will lower property values. We cannot allow this. A few board members nodded half-heartedly, but then Greg, my neighbor, who had been watching the whole process, raised his hand. Actually, Patricia, I think it's great. My kids have been over there almost every day. They're outside, they're active, and they're not glued to their screens. Isn't that what we want in a neighborhood? Another neighbor chimed in, and it looks good. It's not some rusty hoop leaning against a garage. It's a proper court done professionally. If anything, it raises the appeal of our community. I couldn't help but smile. Patricia's face was turning red, but before she could respond, I stood up. Let me save everyone some time. The city has approved my court. I have the permit. Legally, the HOA has no jurisdiction here. If you want to fight it, go ahead, but my lawyer is ready, and so am I. The room buzzed with murmurs. Patricia slammed her gavelese. She actually carried a gavel around like she was presiding over the Supreme Court and snapped. This isn't over. But it was clear from the looks on the board members' faces that she was losing ground. Back home, things only got better. Word spread quickly, and before long, kids from all over the neighborhood were flocking to our house. Every evening, my backyard turned into a lively, cheerful spot. Parents would bring lawn chairs and sit along the fence, cheering their kids on. It wasn't just a basketball court anymore, it was becoming a community hub. One Saturday, we organized a little neighborhood tournament. I bought some cheap trophies from a local store, and Jacob helped me set up a bracket. Families came out, grills fired up, and suddenly it felt like the whole neighborhood was united in something Phoenix. Of course, Patricia dot from her backyard. She watched with arms crossed, fuming. At one point, she even called the cops, claiming we were violating a noise ordinance. But when the officers arrived, they took one look at the kids, laughing and playing, checked my permit, and shook their heads. Looks like everything's in order here, one of them said, smiling at me. Then he added, loud enough for Patricia to hear, this is the kind of thing we like to see in a neighborhood. The cheer from the crowd was deafening. Patricia retreated inside, humiliated. But even then, I knew her fight wasn't over. She was too stubborn to give up. And if there's one thing I learned about Patricia, it's that when she loses publicly, she tries to win privately. And sure enough, she had one more card up her sleeve. I should have known Patricia wouldn't go down quietly. For weeks after the neighborhood tournament, she seemed almost invisible, her blinds stayed shut. Her gavel never made an appearance at HOA meetings, and she didn't send a single letter to my mailbox. At first, I thought maybe she had given up. But with Patricia, silence was never a good sign. One morning, as I was sipping coffee on the porch, a thick envelope arrived from the county courthouse. I tore it open and nearly choked on my drink. Patricia had actually filed a civil complaint against me, personally claiming that my illegal construction violated HOA covenants, reduced her property value, and created psychological distress due to the sound of bouncing basketballs. I laughed, but my wife didn't. She read through the papers and frowned. This is ridiculous, but it's still a lawsuit. We can't ignore it. Luckily, I had prepared for this exact scenario. My lawyer, a sharp-tongued local guy named Richard, was more amused than worried. She's walking into a wall here, he said, thumbing through the complaint. You've got city approval, permits, setbacks, all in line. Her entire argument hinges on HOA bylaws that don't apply to your backyard. But she's trying to weaponize the legal system to scare you. Classic bully move. We filed a response. Immediately. Attaching copies of the city approval and pointing out Patricia's history of harassing homeowners with bogus fines. Richard even requested the judge sanction her for filing a frivolous lawsuit. When Patricia got wind of our response, she doubled down. She started sending out special bulletins to HOA members, warning them that my basketball court would destroy the character of the neighborhood and begging them to contribute to a legal fund. The funny part, hardly anyone joined her. 'Cause most of my neighbors had kids who were enjoying the court every week. Some even told me they'd cancel their HOA dues if Patricia kept pursuing this nonsense. One evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Greg, my neighbor, who had defended me at the board meeting. He handed me a stack of papers, copies of an email chain between board members. "Thought you should see this," he said. The emails revealed Patricia had been trying to coerce the board into draining HOA funds to pay for her lawsuit against me. Several members pushed back, pointing out it wasn't an HOA matrit, was her personal crusade. Still, Patricia was relentless, threatening to fine board members themselves if they didn't comply. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just after me. She was willing to burn down the entire HOA's credibility to get her way. The court date finally arrived. And let me tell you, it was one of the most satisfying days of my life. Patricia strutted in like she owned the place, carrying binders full of HOA rules and photographs of kids playing on my court. She tried to paint the picture of a neighborhood under siege by basketball, but Richard dismantled her case with surgical precision. He presented the city's approval, cited state property law, and even entered testimony from neighbors who supported me. At one point, Patricia started shouting at the judge, insisting the HOA had ultimate authority over everything in the community. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Even if the city has granted legal approval?" Patricia stammered and sputtered, and I could see her confidence unravel by the end of the hearing. The judge dismissed her complaint entirely. Even better, he ordered her to pay my legal fees for wasting the court's time. When Patricia stormed out of the courtroom, red-faced and trembling, I couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. But the fallout was just beginning. News of the ruling spread fast. At the next HOA meeting, half the neighborhood showed up, furious that Patricia had tried to drag them into her personal vendetta. Greg stood up and demanded a vote of no confidence in her leadership. Patricia pounded her gavelese. She still carried it around, shouting about rules, order, and respect. But her voice was drowned out by the chorus of angry homeowners. For the first time, Patricia's iron grip on the HOA was slipping, and that's when I realized this wasn't just about a basketball court anymore. Patricia's obsession with control had finally backfired, and the entire neighborhood was ready to take a stand. What happened next would change our community forever and leave Patricia with no place left to hide. The tension in the neighborhood was reaching a boiling point. Patricia had always been a tyrant with her clipboard and gavel, but after losing in court, her credibility was shot. People were fed up. The HOA meeting that followed was unlike any we'd ever seen. Dozens of homeowners packed into the clubhouse, many standing shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with anticipation. I sat quietly near the back, wanting to watch it unfold. Patricia entered last, slamming her gavel against the table, trying to project authority she no longer had. "Order. This is still my meeting," she barked. Greg stood up almost immediately, holding a printed copy of the court ruling in one hand and a petition in the other. "Actually, Patricia," he said calmly, "it's not your meeting anymore. We're tired of your abuse, your fines, your personal vendettas. We're voting tonight." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Patricia tried to shout over them, insisting she had the final say, but no one was listening. The board members, who had been quietly complicit for years, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One by one, they nodded along with Greg. The vote was swift. Nearly every homeowner raised their hand in favor of removing Patricia as HOA president. When the result was read aloud, Patricia's face went pale. She slammed her gavel one last time and stormed out of the room, muttering threats about coming back stronger. But everyone knew her reign of terror was over. With Patricia gone, something amazing happened. The community started to come together in ways it never had before. Families began organizing weekly events around the basketball court pickup games, kids' tournaments, even charity fundraisers. Parents who had never spoken to each other before were suddenly cheering side by side. And neighbors who had kept their distance were now grilling hot dogs together after games. The court became more than just a place to play. It became the heart of the neighborhood. It was a symbol of standing up to bullying, of reclaiming our homes and our community from someone who thought power meant control. Months later, I was sitting on the bleachers watching a group of kids play a 3-on-3 game. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and laughter echoed through the air. Greg sat down next to me, nudging me with his elbow. "You realize this never would have happened if Patricia hadn't pushed so hard, right?" he said with a grin. I chuckled. Funny how bullies always end up creating their own downfall. Word about our little victory spread beyond the neighborhood. The local paper even wrote an article about the HOA that lost to a basketball court, framing it as a win for homeowners everywhere tired of overreach. The best part? The city officials who had approved my court sent me a letter congratulating us on turning it into a community hub. As for Patricia, well, last I heard, she put her house up for sale. Nobody was surprised. She couldn't handle living in a place where she wasn't in control, where the neighborhood thrived without her constant interference. Watching her move out was the final chapter. No shouting, no lawsuits, no threats, just silence as the moving truck pulled away. And I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. It's watching the community you fought for flourish in the absence of the person who tried to destroy it. So that's the story of how my HOA tried to ban basketball hoops, and how their power-hungry president ended up destroying herself instead. Of me, what started as a simple fight over a hoop turned into a lesson about persistence, standing up for what's right, and refusing to let someone bully an entire neighborhood. To anyone listening who's ever felt trapped by an unfair HOA or an unreasonable neighbor, remember this: bullies thrive on fear and silence. But when you know your rights and stand your ground, even the biggest bully can be brought down. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'll end up building something so much bigger and better in the process. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a court. It was about freedom, community, and proving that no gavel, no fine, and no HOA can silence a neighborhood determined to stand together.